My name is Ramon, cosmetic formulator and sunscreen fanatic, and today we're talking about just that, sunscreen, but specifically some controversial opinions. I obviously post a lot of sunscreen content, and therefore I have my own opinions, but I also see other creators' content. I see all the comments and all the DMs I get from subscribers and followers. I've seen a lot of other controversial SPF opinions, therefore today I'm going to be talking about it. I made some tea, unironically, even though we will be spilling tea because I got my vaccine yesterday and I am feeling it. Also worth noting, some of these are my own opinions, some of these are your own opinions you submitted, so thank you for that, but let's get into it. So first, sunscreen opinion, and this is very much my own. Y'all are wearing too much sunscreen and that is why you are having a bad time. I say this all the time and I see it all the time where creators or subscribers DM me and they're like, you really like the sunscreen, it looks great on you, but it has a white cast on me, it's not right for my skin type, it's just really heavy and greasy. And I'm like, how much sunscreen are you putting on? And they're like, well, I put 3 finger lengths on my face, and we all know, I mean, I have videos on this, I'll link it up here, where like I've measured my face, I know how much I need for my face, and I do know it varies because some people got different sized faces, some people got different sized hands, so not everyone's going to need the same amount I am. But when I see someone putting on 3 finger lengths of a mineral sunscreen on just their face and it's not working into their skin, user error is definitely at fault, and that is why you're having a bad time. Use less, and I think we'll get into this in a bit with one of the other opinions, but some moderation is nice as long as you're putting on enough. And with this, you see people say apply a 1/4 teaspoon, a 1/2 teaspoon, a full teaspoon, 2 full teaspoons for your face, you're using your neck. And looking at how much that is, it's outrageous. You would literally go through a 50 ml sunscreen in like 2 days. But also looking at how much realistically someone does need, even just taking like the 3 finger method, which I think is generous, but could be applicable to most people for face, ears, and neck. And then comparing that to a full teaspoon to 2 full teaspoons, it's outrageous, especially when most dermatologists recommend for each appendage, for each arm, each leg, putting a full teaspoon. So don't use so much. Next controversial opinion, and this is one that I speak of a lot, and it's just more applicable to all skincare. Different sunscreens work for different people, and that is okay. And just because a sunscreen doesn't work for you doesn't mean it's a bad product, and we have different skin types. For example, I have really oily, acne-prone skin. I tend to prefer more oily skin-friendly sunscreen, more gel texture, and some people don't because they like something more moisturizing, where those textures don't work on my skin, especially if those are mineral-based sunscreens and they are oil-based for some reason, and it came up with the Pipette and the Biossance. Those squalane-based vehicles just did not mesh with my skin, and therefore those sunscreens didn't work well for my skin, and they did leave a white cast on me, even though they work great for people with very deep skin tones. Just understand, some sunscreens work for me, they won't work for you, doesn't mean it's a bad product, skin is unique. This is a subscriber submitted opinion, but I have my own points to add to this, and the opinion is, I'm not interested if it's not SPF 50+. And my opinion on this is that I feel like there's a semi-unhealthy fixation on higher SPF values. Everyone wants higher, faster, louder, they want higher numbers and higher protection factors, which there's a time and a place for that, I will concede that point. That being said, no matter how high that SPF is, no matter how high that UVA PF value is, which I think is everyone's big fixation at this moment in time, you're never getting 100% protection, and just come to terms with that right now. Realistically, my own opinion, and that's kind of like really coming from my opinion as a scientist, looking at studies, seeing what dermatologists say, seeing what estheticians say, is the fact that you are better off really focusing less on the SPF factor of your sunscreen so long as it's above SPF 30, and really focusing on what other sun protection factors are you really applying to your daily life. If it's really that important for you, are you wearing UPF clothing? Are you avoiding the sun, especially during high UV index days? What are the other sun safety practices you are implementing into your daily life? Because in reality, sunscreen is only a small part of the equation of overall sun safety. So next point is one I actually primarily user submitted, but I have expressed specific opinions on this and I feel very strongly about this. The first part of it is that I feel like people have developed a very unhealthy fear of the sun, and conversely, there's an unhealthy reliance on sunscreen and sun protection factors. And someone submitted that they feel like colorism is tied into it. And first and foremost, I will say I understand that there are realistic concerns, specifically with those who suffer from skin cancer in their families or suffer from conditions that make them more prone to UV damage or sensitivity to UV exposure. That in itself 100% is a reason. But then I feel like I get a lot of comments about this, and it was something I got a lot when I first actually started content creating. People being like, I don't want to be dark, I don't want to be tan. And I do understand, scientifically speaking, biologically speaking, the effects of tanning, melanin production in the skin, oftentimes as a result of your body protecting yourself from UV damage. Your body detects UV exposure and wants to protect the cellular DNA. It forms melanin as a defense mechanism for that. And that is why you tan. If you are relying on just sunscreen, you're going to tan just because sunscreen doesn't protect 100% from UV rays. But I feel like there is, again, this mentality on I don't want to be dark, I don't want to be tan in a more colorism sort of way. And that's not a reason I recommend sunscreen use, and I'm not okay with that. This is based off something I see a lot of people talk about, specifically on Twitter, and it is the fact that, and this is kind of a joke, but it's a hate crime to recommend mineral sunscreens to people of color. Here's the thing, I understand the mentality behind it, because obviously there's not a lot of elegance for deeper skin tones in mineral sunscreens. They don't look good. They don't work well on those skin tones. But conversely, you have to understand that, I mean, specifically in the US market, because elsewhere, and I'll get to this, there's a different approach to certain sunscreen formulations. But if you have more sensitive skin and you're reactive to FDA approved UV filters, you might have to resort to mineral based sunscreens until you find potentially a chemical sunscreen that doesn't irritate you. Specifically, if you have skin conditions that make you more prone to irritation, or you have contact dermatitis reactions to chemical sunscreens, understand, look at the other perspective of sometimes that's all they can use. There are formulas that can potentially work, or there's ways to work around it, but one of the reasons my content does so well is because I try to review mineral sunscreens and bring other creators who've reviewed those same sunscreens so that people with deeper skin tones who can't use chemical sunscreens have resources to find sunscreens that could work for them. Next point, and this was subscriber submitted, and this was get off your high horse with your attitude around sunscreen. And I kind of agree with this. I feel like we push sunscreen. And I mean, in the skincare community, sunscreen is like that top tier rule pretty much everyone agrees with. You have to wear sunscreen. You have to wear sunscreen. I feel like it gets in people's heads if they don't understand why, or they're kind of getting into it and they're new. They're like, oh gosh, I need this sunscreen. I need it. A, they might not know the reason why, but B, they also don't understand that they don't have to spend an arm and a leg, and they don't have to do all these things that are outside of their price range, that are outside of their financial means. Like, it costs a lot of money. I saw someone on TikTok really break down what the math looks like, and it's a good financial investment. So understand, if someone has it within their means, try to wear sunscreen, but realistically, don't bully people into it. Don't make it this be all end all. If you're not wearing sunscreen, why are you even doing skincare? Which I'm kind of guilty of. I will own up to that. But get off your high horse. Next point is kind of a continuation of that, but it's basically saying that sunscreen is still a privilege. It costs money. It's something that you have to consistently do, and it's one of those necessary things. But in reality, sunscreens have no business being above $25, 100% agree. And also, face sunscreens need to be double the size. 50 mil, what is this? Why is this the consistent number? And why, who decided that? Realistically, again, it comes down to what the price is per mil, how often you're applying and reapplying throughout the day, the elegance of the formula. But in reality, like, that's why my content is what it is. I don't want to recommend sunscreen above $25, especially if that's something you're going to have to reapply consistently and you should be using every day. It makes no sense. Next one, I've talked about this before. I have a lot of thoughts on it, and this was the most user submitted response, was that chemical sunscreens are better than mineral sunscreens, as well as European filters or like international filters are better than US filters. There's truth to this, but we'll get into that. First and foremost, chemical versus mineral, which is better. That's fundamentally based on user preference. I'm not going to come out here and say like, you need to be using chemical sunscreens for X, Y, and Z reasons. Mineral sunscreens suck. Like, whatever works for you, works for you. If you're happy to use it, please continue to do so. Like, that's all that matters. Scientifically speaking though, this is a point that I've gotten to arguments on Twitter and TikTok about. Is there one that performs better than the other? Yes. Kind of. And this was in response to someone saying, well, mineral sunscreens have much more superior UVA protection than chemical sunscreens. No, they do not. And if I can get it on screen, I'll have it on screen. But basically, we are well aware of the fact that a good combination of chemical filters, specifically in the US, just because internationally we have very good broad spectrum chemical filters now, can outperform both in UV absorption range, but also photoprotective efficacy, mineral sunscreens by a landslide. They have much better absorption spectrums. You can really get up into the nooks and crannies of the UV absorption spectrum, but also because chemical sunscreens are constantly being innovated, being created, you can really synthesize a much more effective chemical sunscreen than the existing mineral sunscreens. Like, in reality, we have 2 mineral sunscreen filters and that's kind of it. So I do personally believe the most superior sunscreen, especially in terms of UVA protection and elegance, is going to be a chemical sunscreen or even a combination sunscreen of both filters. But fundamentally, please use what is best for you. Your preference and what you are most comfortable using matters most. Next point, and this is submitted by My Skin is Glass on Instagram, a really amazing Instagram account for sunscreen recommendations. He was like, we need more water resistant Korean sunscreens. And yes, as we're getting more and more approval and reformulations from brands of sunscreens actually meeting advertised SPF protection, Korean sunscreens are supreme for their elegance. If they could just tack on a little bit of like heavy duty waterproof, sweat proof, or sweat resistance wear, gold, honestly, like game change. I find that still Korean sunscreens for me just are better than European sunscreens in terms of elegance and skin feel. Some European sunscreens can be a little bit heavy. That one extra thing could like change the game for me. This next one was completely user submitted and I have opposing opinions, but this one is, there's no need to reapply reapply unless you're at the beach. You shouldn't even worry about sunscreen if it's a cloudy day or you're in London, for example, right now where it's like a very low UV index. And in reality, reapplication for me is important if you are in high UV exposure. Like you're out in the middle of the day, UV index is like 4 and above, you're like under the sun from 10 to 2 p.m. Like that for me is like under some heavy duty sun. You should make sure your sunscreen application is a little bit more diligent if that's important to you. Reality though, do I stick to that? Most times, no. I'm testing out a lot of different options for reapplication, so I'm doing more so now, but in reality, if I'm home alone, I'll reapply a really good base in the morning, stay home throughout the day. I'm not really reapplying unless I'm really going out to meet someone and it's like very sunny. There is a time and a place for reapplication. Being at the beach isn't the only one, but in reality, I do also feel like even if it's cloudy, even if it's a low UV index day, just get one good application in and you'll be fine, in my opinion. I feel like we really hyper stress reapplication all the time, every day, no matter what. You know, again, healthy relationship with sunscreen. I think there's a balance, but we do know even if it's cloudy, no matter what the season is, there is still UV exposure. I think you should be taking measures to protect yourself. Next one, and I had a really interesting conversation about this with my sunscreen friend, Capricornium Skin on Instagram, and this was a different user submitted this, and that is, it's a lazy recommendation to say sensitive skin should only stick to mineral filters. On top of that, mineral sunscreens aren't the universally best or safest option for those with rosacea. And my conversation with Capricornium Skin was just that, think about it. If you have sensitive skin, you have sensitive skin. Let's say you're using a mineral sunscreen that takes some elbow grease to work in, and you're just sitting there and you are rubbing your skin raw. Is that the best option for sensitive skin or those with rosacea? Not really. And I think back to when I was doing these swatches for my body sunscreen video, the mineral one, and I was in there trying to work those sunscreens in, and not even like trying to work them in to make them work, just like casually rubbing them in. The friction on my arm skin was so painful that by the end of it, after like the 15 or so swatches I did, my arm was rubbed raw. So in reality, I think this is a very good point. And I mentioned earlier, some people think that mineral sunscreens are better for sensitive skin. A really interesting thing that I've come to realize is that here in the EU, the way they approach sensitive skin friendly sunscreens is completely different to how they do it in the US. In the US, if it's sensitive skin friendly, most times it's going to be a mineral sunscreen. It's going to be very inelegant. Here, it is so hard to find mineral sunscreen formulations. Most of the sensitive skin friendly options tend to use the more innovative EU filters only that have really good safety profiles. So they avoid some of the more notoriously irritating FDA approved filters. So they have the tenosorbs, they have the uvenols. They also might tie in titanium dioxide. I find that's a very common addition for sensitive skin friendly sunscreens, but in reality, they have a very different approach and they use chemical filters and they are meant for more sensitive skin types. And if you go to my video for my sensitive skin friendly sunscreens for summer, you have a lot of people being like, oh, I have sensitive skin, but I love this chemical based sunscreen because it works for me. It doesn't irritate my sensitive skin or my sensitive eye area. So mineral sunscreens, I 100% agree, are not the universal best answer for sensitive, sensitized skin or those with rosacea. This next point, this was user submitted, but I have a whole video talking about this basically, and it's that it's complicated enough formulating and having it tested, sunscreens, to try and meet the desired ratings. And basically, I think the consensus of what they're trying to get to is the fact that there is so much of a fixation on what is the SPF rating, what is the actual like proven SPF rating. And this is something my boyfriend and I talked about, and I mentioned it in the video, is the fact that SPF on an advertised packaging is kind of a best of situation. In reality, he's like, it should be more of a range, or it should be something like you could get up to this value if you apply in an adequate manner. Again, that 2 milligrams per centimeter squared is important because that's how they test the sunscreens. So you get people being like, well, it's SPF 50. Is it actually SPF 50 plus? And it's like, are you actually putting on enough sunscreen? Are you doing other sun protection measures aside from sunscreen to make sure you're getting adequate protection? That's what I see in my head. Again, now we're getting more test results from sunscreens and they're meeting or not meeting or falling just slightly short of what the SPF is. But in reality, there's so much variability in SPF testing, the subjects that are getting tested on, because A, it's mostly volunteer based, and generally they're more fair skin, and how fair skin reacts to UV exposure is much different than how medium to deep skin reacts to UV exposure. And on top of that, it's what region's doing the testing and what are the regulations. So there's a lot of error that can go on in terms of the testing and also user error, where that SPF value on a packaging is very much a, you could get this, I guess, sometimes, maybe, we'll see. So really you should focus on more other protection factors overall as opposed to specifically what is on that packaging. This next one is one I'm not going to speak much about, and someone submitted this, and this was the reality of the risk of cancer or endocrine disrupting factors when it comes to sunscreens. Lab Muffin has all the videos on this. Go watch her channel because she speaks on this the same way I'm going to, but basically those studies often greatly exaggerated unrealistic expectations and standards for the sunscreen that's used and the overall exposure needed to suffer from any of those specific things. So it's not realistic, it's not real. It's a fantasy. Next one, very interesting point, and one that kind of goes back to reapplication. It's the fact that sprays and powders are shams for reapplication. You can't get the adequate amount necessary to get adequate protection. And my point of view on this, my controversial opinion on this, yes and no. Lab Muffin did a video, going back to her, about the powder SPF, and in reality, it is hard or almost impossible to get the desired SPF with the swirling method of an SPF powder. It's hard to necessarily prove that you are getting that SPF protection with a powder. But in reality, I'm like, if that's something that's going to make you reapply and that's something you're going to consistently use throughout the day after a very good solid base application with like a lotion or a gel, I'm not really mad at it. In terms of sprays and mists though, I'm a lot more confident with those, specifically because I feel like you can really drench your face, make sure you're getting a good reapplication with those, or a good reapplication anyways. And I feel a lot better about that. I'm testing out a bunch of sunscreen sprays. Make sure you subscribe to make sure when that video is live. But I'm like, oh, these are really good options. And I feel like you're really getting a good amount for reapplication. I mean, I also like drench my face. Again, throughout the day, your initial sunscreen base, as oils seep through, as it faces wear and tear, it starts to break up a little bit, and essentially you're getting like holes in the protection. Reapplication just reinforces that layer and makes sure that you have no holes and that you're a little bit better off. It's not, in my opinion, intended to give you a whole brand new layer. It's just really reinforcing the initial layer that you had in the first place. And the last controversial sunscreen opinion is that people need to relax. Fundamentally, I say all the time, it's just skincare. And I understand there's people who do have specific concerns around UV exposure, cancer risks. There are so many ways to protect yourself and make sure that you are getting the adequate protection you need with sunscreen, UPF clothing, sun exposure. There's a lot of ways to go about it, but the stress and emphasis and fear that's really instilled around sunscreen use and like sun avoidance, to me, it's getting a lot. It's getting to be very excessive, and I feel like we can collectively take a breath, apply our sunscreen, exhale. I think we can safely enjoy the sun, have a good relationship with the sun, while also making sure we're making like adequate sun safety decisions throughout the day and protecting yourself from the sun, preventing hyperpigmentation, preventing sun cancer risk, you know? So with that, that is my controversial sunscreen opinions, both my own and subscriber submitted. Let me know down below in the comments. Do you agree or disagree with anything I said? Also, what are your own controversial sunscreen opinions? I love hearing what you guys have to say. I love the discourse that goes on in those comments, so long as you keep it cute. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and notification bell so that you know when I post more skincare, sunscreen, and plenty of other content on my channel. Give me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.